The cataclysmic flood of Noah utterly annihilated the old world. It swept away its inhabitants and swept clean the artifacts of their civilization, their knowledge, and their technology. The only remaining vestiges of that age of corruption, the so-called Golden Age, are the megaliths. The term megalith refers to prehistoric edifices constructed with immensely large stones. The ruined foundations of these megaliths, still standing like fleshless bones after thousands of years of inundation and weathering, bear witness to the builder gods of the pre-flood world, their hybrid offspring, and their celestial knowledge.
There exists a vast network of megaliths all over the planet, some of which are well known, like Baalbek in Lebanon and Stonehenge in England, while many others, such as the Bosnian Pyramid and the recently discovered megaliths in Siberia, have not even been officially acknowledged as artificial structures yet, because their unfathomable size absolutely demolishes the conventional paradigms of anthropology.
Not only are there megalithic ruins dispersed over every continent on the surface of the earth, many megalithic structures, like the ⁶ are buried under the ground and sunken beneath the oceans. This is a worldwide phenomenon that is much more widespread and significant than anyone even realizes. One of the most impressive and important megalithic sites in the world is located just outside the city of Cusco. The Inca called it ⁶⁶
The first thing that you need to know about ⁶⁶ before formulating any conjectures concerning its construction or its builders is that what you are seeing is literally only the tip of the iceberg. When Anselm and his expeditionary team excavated at ⁶⁶ they discovered that more levels of these cyclopean walls were still buried beneath the sediment of the mountain, a testament to the fury and force of the Great Flood. The fact is that only 10 to 15% of this enormous megalithic complex has been unearthed, and what remains above ground today is much less than what was present centuries ago, before the Spaniards dynamited and dismantled the higher segments of the walls for the construction of their own villas and cathedrals in the city of Cusco.
Each mammoth block incorporated in the walls of ⁶⁶ is precisely and uniquely fitted with the ones surrounding it without the use of mortar. Some of these polygonal blocks weigh over 300 tons and stand over 20 feet tall. The quarry from which they are believed to have been extracted is over 20 miles away. Inca legend records that the walls of ⁶⁶ were built by giants. The first Spaniards to lay eyes on these walls also believed that they could not have been built with human hands, and that they must have been the work of enchantment or demons.
If there was ever an example of an ancient construction that appears to have been built by giants, it's here in ⁶⁶. These massive stones have been fit so perfectly together that you can't even slip a piece of paper between them. This is incredible masonry beyond the capability of mere human beings, in my opinion.
The official narrative concerning the walls of ⁶⁶ is that the Inca constructed them using ropes, ramps, and soft metal chisels, employing many thousands of workers for many decades, which is not only ridiculous, but also impossible for numerous reasons. During the course of his excavations, Anselm P. Rambla uncovered proof that earlier civilizations had occupied ⁶⁶ long before the rise of the Incan Empire.
Although the Inca did not build the walls of ⁶⁶ or any of the megaliths found throughout their empire, they did make use of them. Fortifications and towers devised by Incan masons were raised right on top of impregnable pre-flood foundations. The workmanship of the Inca sticks out like a sore thumb and represents a level of technology consistent with a Bronze Age civilization.
The mighty Cyclopean walls of ⁶ don't stand alone in Cusco. At one time, the entire city was a megalithic metropolis. The city of Cusco itself bears witness to the superior technology that once existed in the distant past. Many of the buildings lining its streets and back alleys have been built on top of ancient megalithic foundations. Since its fall to the conquistadors in the 16th century, numerous devastating earthquakes have rocked the city of Cusco. In every case, the walls of the cathedrals and villas built by the Spaniards came crumbling down, but the pre-flood Cyclopean walls stood fast.
Megaliths aren't just big, they're geometrically precise, intentionally and ingeniously devised to withstand extreme seismic activity. This is a kind of master masonry from the prehistoric past, far surpassing anything we can build with stone today. The difference between the two walls here in this one street in Cusco is astounding. This is the original construction. If you look straight down it, you'll see that it's straight. It's very well constructed, and it's leaning in a little bit, and they built these walls like this so that they could withstand earthquakes. This is the Spanish side of the wall, where the Spaniards took apart the blocks and reconstructed them here, and you can see that they used a lot of concrete. And if you look down this wall, you see that it is very poorly constructed in comparison to the original wall, very wavy, and you get the sense that this thing would come crashing down in the event of a large earthquake. The Cyclopean walls found throughout the region of Cusco are primarily comprised of hard andesite, basalt, and granite blocks, which have a distinguishing convex or pillowed surface to them with beveled joints, as if they were soft and malleable like clay when they were set into place and then pressed together.
There is reason to believe that the antediluvians may have been able to somehow change the chemical composition or even the atomic structure of hard stone in order to make it softer and more pliable and possibly lighter. This may sound unbelievable, but it is consistent with what is observed in the streets of Cusco.
It appears that these two large boulders have been set on top of this rock here, while this rock was not entirely hard. In other words, this rock would have been soft, and these heavy rocks would have been placed on top of it, and they would have literally squished down into this rock on the bottom. And that is exactly what appears to have happened here.
Aside from these stones having the appearance of being pressed together, raised ridgelines can be seen on their outer parameters when adjacent stones are removed. This is yet another indication that these blocks may not have been carved, but set into place like lumps of clay where they molded into one another as they hardened.
It is apparent to anyone willing to think outside of the very limited parameters of conventional archaeology that the Cyclopean walls in Cusco represent in themselves a lost age of profound scientific knowledge and advanced technology. It is also apparent that neither the Inca nor any of the cultures they conquered were in possession of that knowledge. What is often overlooked is evidence indicating how suddenly devastation befell the builders of the megaliths. This is best illustrated in the place where the Inca won their greatest victory over the Spanish, ⁶
⁶ is located about 40 miles outside of the city of Cusco and was built up as a defensive position by the Inca against the invading Spaniards. The constructions at ⁶ represent a fusion of pre-flood Cyclopean masonry with inferior Bronze Age level masonry and demonstrates an attempt by the Inca to copy the Cyclopean style, but the stark contrast between the two is glaring.
⁶ has some of the most well-preserved and masterful Cyclopean masonry I've ever seen. Some of the curved corners in the walls are sculpted from single blocks and joined together with flawless precision.
Just like at ⁶⁰ and in the streets of Cusco, these walls were built at an inclination to withstand earthquakes. One of the amazing things about the engineering of these gigantic walls is that they were built on an inclination. This is a very advanced engineering, apart from the fact that these blocks are absolutely immense.
⁶⁰ is the key for decoding the origin and sudden disappearance of the megalith builders in the Altiplano. Combined in this one location are two distinct cyclopean architectural styles: the polygonal convex blocks of the Cusco region and the rectangular interlocking vitrified blocks of Tiwanaku. These two styles together suggest that they are related and have nothing to do with the Inca. Located at the summit of the constructions are some of the largest standing Tiwanaku-style blocks ever discovered.
So these are the famous megalithic stones here that make up part of the wall at the Temple of the Sun in Ollantaytambo. One of the interesting things that we notice, having come from Tiwanaku, is that we have these patterns that were being carved into these rocks, into the face of this wall, that are basically originate in Tiwanaku. And this is exactly what we're told by the guides, that whoever built this wall was either the same culture of the people who built in Tiwanaku, or they copied their form of construction. We're told that these smaller stones in between the large ones here were placed so that this structure would resist earthquakes, that when this structure began to shake, it would crush the smaller stones rather than the big stones cracking and falling. So it's pretty ingenious construction they had up here. Each one of these rocks weighs, each one of these stones weighs somewhere between 70 and 100 tons each, and were quarried from the side of the mountain, way up high in the mountains up there, and somehow were brought and placed to where they are now.
These gigantic blocks were cut out of the bedrock near the peak of the mountain at very high elevations, and then carried down the mountain, over the river, across the valley, and up the dirt ramps that are still present to this day before being set into place without a scratch on them. This was, in every sense of the word, a superhuman feat. What is undeniable about Ollantaytambo is that whoever the builders of the megaliths were, they suddenly disappeared before finishing the project. Large blocks of stone were left lying on the ground, as if dropped in panic and confusion. It is claimed that this abrupt cessation in construction was due to the invasion of the conquistadors. But it is far more likely that the invading force was not the Spanish, but the waters of the Great Flood.
This behind me is called the military zone up here in Ollantaytambo, because this is where the Incas built their stronghold to resist the conquistadores that were moving in on them. Our theory about this place is that the Incas found a construction here that was extremely advanced, and so they decided to build on top of it or add to it. They probably thought it was a holy place. They certainly revered whoever the mythical builders were of this place. In their eyes, perhaps giants or gods that built these immense constructions. And as you can see, there's a huge difference between the massive, intricate stonework that we found in Pumapunku and what we see here at the Temple of the Sun, and what the Incans built in haste here behind me to fortify themselves against the Spanish.
Ollantaytambo is perhaps the best illustration on Earth of how post-flood cultures attempted to copy and emulate the works of the gods who lived in the age of corruption before the flood.
As fascinating and far-reaching as its implications are, Cusco is but a microcosm of a much larger reality existent on a global scale, pertaining not only to the phenomenon of the megaliths and the sudden disappearance of their builders, but also to the special knowledge that the Holy See harbors concerning them. In order to verify this reality, we had to travel to another hemisphere where the same dynamics of those present in Cusco could be observed. Somewhere a little closer to the axis of papal power. The island of Malta.
Located in the Mediterranean, roughly 50 miles south of Sicily and 200 miles north of Tripoli, the island of Malta is one of the world's smallest and most densely populated countries. Though the landmass of the island measures just over 120 square miles, its vistas are rich with variety and history. Malta's strategic location in the Mediterranean has made it an important asset to a succession of powers throughout history. But it was the Knights Hospitaller, otherwise known as the Knights of St. John, that left the most enduring mark on the societal development, art, and architecture of the island.
Over the centuries, Malta has accommodated a diverse array of governing powers. The Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, Moors, Normans, Sicilians, Spanish, the Knights of St. John, and most recently, the French and the British, have all ruled the island for a period of time during the course of its colorful history. As a result, modern Malta is an eclectic blend of ethnic and cultural heritages. But the identity of the earliest inhabitants of the island is shrouded in mystery. Because just like the megalith builders of Cusco, they seemingly disappeared overnight without a trace.
Although located in two different hemispheres, Cusco and Malta are surprisingly similar in a few very intriguing ways. First, the Church of Rome has a prominent and long-standing presence in both. Second, there is a hidden network of ancient underground structures and tunnels in both. And third, both are home to large Cyclopean megaliths. The megaliths in Malta are said to be the oldest freestanding structures on Earth. Some of these structures were built to the same scale as the walls of ⁶ in Cusco and display many of the same engineering techniques. But because they were constructed with limestone, which is considerably softer than granite and andesite, they are much more eroded. Close proximity to the sea has also exposed the stones to a constant blast of corrosive salty air for thousands of years. What's fascinating is that in the mid-16th century, while the Spaniards were looking on the walls of ⁶ in Peru for the first time and walking through the ruins of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the first excavations of the megaliths on Malta were beginning, and the very same conclusions were being drawn by the explorers in both hemispheres. These were all structures built by an extinct race of antediluvian giants, which is exactly what the ancients have been telling us for thousands of years.
The ancients believed that the megaliths found on the islands of Malta were built by a race of giants. In fact, here at the ⁶ temples on the island of Gozo, close to the mainland island of Malta, there's this UNESCO sign that says the name ⁶ derives from the word ⁶, Maltese for giant. as ⁶ used to believe the temples were built by a race of giants.
We're in the interpretation center at ⁶ and Gozo, where you have a number of legends from all over the world displayed here, including Stonehenge, which the ancients thought was built by Merlin, but not alone. He had help from giants to shift those huge blocks of stone. Here in Gozo, ⁶ which comes from the word giant, the place of giants, was actually built this time not by a man or Merlin, but by a woman who had a child and would carry the child along with her on her jobs carrying huge blocks of stone. Incidentally, her name was Sansuna, which is probably a reference to the biblical Samson, Sansun in Maltese. So we even know her name.
The ancients often encrypted secret knowledge in the form of myths that were easily remembered and passed down from one generation to the next. ⁶ was obviously not built by a single giant woman, but the details of the story provide clues to the true identity and nature of the builders. The most obvious clue is her name, Samson, which indicates supernatural strength.
What's important to note about the megalithic blocks used in the construction of these sites here in Malta is that many of them are fragmented. They're fragmented now, but you have to imagine these blocks as solid pieces at one time. These were solid blocks of limestone, and you can see where they're fragmented and where they've chipped off. Those aren't separate blocks. These were solid one-piece blocks that were used as the material for building in these structures. Looking at this temple complex, I'm reminded of the walls of ⁶ in Peru, which are very, very similar to this structure here, to what we see in this structure here. If this were not limestone, if this were andesite, or if this were a harder stone, they would probably be very smooth and fit together so tightly that you couldn't pass a blade between them, just like we see in Peru. And what that suggests is something that conventional historians and archaeologists can't accept, that there was once a common global race, very likely of giants, that were building megaliths all over the earth in a very similar fashion.
As in every case around the world, after the megalith builders disappeared from Malta, consecutive cultures of lesser technological skill occupied the vacant edifices they left behind and attempted to repair them using smaller stones, usually held together with mortar. Archaeologists often ignore this obvious fact and credit the primitive latecomers with the building of the impressive structures they merely inhabited and refurbished. Aside from the monumental task of cutting, carrying, and lifting the massive stones into place, these ancient master builders were also assembling them into circular dome configurations, which requires an extremely high degree of mathematical precision and is much more difficult to accomplish than building traditional square or rectangular structures.
Caught in the crossfire. It's caught in the crossfire.